People who grow up near marshland learn rules nobody explains. You do not go out after dark. You do not follow lights you cannot place. And when someone says part of the swamp is off limits, you do not ask why. In Hollow Marsh, people do not vanish loudly. They simply stop being part of daily life. The locals say something watches that place. They call it the warden. This is the first of 3 true swamp and marsh horror stories they refuse to explain. The first thing I noticed about Hollow Marsh was the smell. It did not smell like normal swamp, not just mud and muck and rotten leaves. There was something thick in it, like pond water that had been trapped in a bucket for years. It clung to the back of my throat as I stood at the edge of the wooden overlook, hands on the damp rail, staring out over the reeds. "Smell never really goes away," a voice said behind me. "You get used to it, or you move." I turned and saw him, the same wiry old man who had been standing behind the counter at the gas station when I pulled into town that afternoon. Same faded ball cap, same flannel shirt, same permanent frown carved into his cheeks. "You follow me out here?" I asked. He shrugged. "You asked where Hollow Marsh was. Figured you would end up here before dark. Outsiders always do." "I am not a tourist," I said. "I grew up here. Left when I was a kid." He squinted at me, eyes narrowing. "What is your name then?" "Evan Pike." His expression shifted. Not friendly, but different. Recognition mixed with something like pity. "Jim Holloway," he said. "I knew your father. He was a good man." I did not know what to say to that, so I just turned back to the marsh. The water spread out in a wide, shallow basin, choked with cattails and tall brown reeds. Trees leaned in around the edges as if they were all trying not to fall in. The sun was sinking behind them, painting the water with broken strips of gold that did not reach very far. Near the middle of the marsh there was a dark patch, a round area where the vegetation thinned out and the water looked deeper. Even from the overlook, I could see that it was black. Not dark green, not brown. Black. "You should not be here this late," Jim said quietly. "It is barely 6, I replied. He did not answer that. Instead, he stepped up beside me and rested his elbows on the rail. For a long time, we both watched the marsh in silence. I had not come back for scenery. My father was dead, lungs finally giving up after decades in the mill, and I had inherited the ugly little house on the edge of town that no one wanted to buy. I lost my job a month later, and the cheap answer was obvious. Move back. Live there. Start over in the place I had tried to forget. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself a lot of things. "What do you remember about this place?" Jim asked. I frowned. "Nothing. We moved away when I was 8. "You remember your father coming out here with the search parties? When the Miller boy went missing?" Something stirred, deep in the part of my mind that remembered cold mornings and the smell of wet moss. My father lacing up boots. My mother saying it was not a good idea to involve himself. Arguments in the kitchen. My father saying something about doing his part. "I remember people talking," I said slowly. "A kid fell in." Jim eyed the marsh. "That is what they said." "You do not think so?" He snorted. "Kids fall in ponds. Kids fall in rivers. They do not vanish in waist-deep water while a dozen grown men are 10 yards away with flashlights." I did not like the way he said vanish. "What happened then?" I asked. Jim scratched at his cheek. "The same thing that has always happened. The marsh took what it was due, and everything went back to normal, for a while." He said it like it was a simple fact. "What it was due," I echoed. He sighed. "Your father never told you the story, did he?" "I guess not," I said. Jim nodded, as if that confirmed something for him. He tapped the rail once with his knuckles. "Then let me tell you the one he should have told you," he said. "It is the only rule that matters in this town. The marsh does not fall behind." The wind rattled the reeds like dry bones. A crow called from somewhere in the trees. The dark patch in the center of the marsh seemed to shift, as if something turned just under that flat black surface. I swallowed. "What does that even mean?" He glanced at the sky. The last strips of orange were fading to gray. "Not here," he said. "Come by the station tomorrow morning, 6 sharp. Bring coffee. Black. I will show you something. I shouldn't have to say it, but don't stay here too much longer." Before I could argue, he pushed away from the railing and walked back down the path toward the gravel lot. I watched his outline shrink between the trees until he blended with the dark. The marsh waited in front of me, patient and still. Then, from somewhere near that black patch, I saw a ripple. Not a small wave, not wind. A wide, slow circle spreading outward, as if something very large had moved just below the surface. I told myself it was a fish, a log, a trick of light. Then I left. The next morning I poured 2 coffees into paper cups from the old machine in my kitchen, drove into town, and found Jim already waiting in front of the gas station. He was leaning against the ice chest, arms folded, as if he had been there for hours. "You are late," he said, taking the cup without thanks. "It is 6:05, I replied. "In this town that counts as late." He jerked his head toward the side of the station and started around it. I followed, feeling like a kid again, dragged along by some adult who had decided to share a story I was not sure I wanted. Behind the station was a cinder-block garage, a row of rusty oil drums, and, tucked back against the fence, a small office trailer. Jim unlocked the door and led me inside. The trailer smelled like dust and old paper. Metal shelves lined the walls, stacked with cardboard boxes and binders. There was a desk with a cracked plastic top, a single chair, and a crooked corkboard covered in yellowed newspaper clippings. Jim nodded at the wall. "There." I stepped closer. The clippings were all about Hollow Marsh. Local teen missing near Hollow Marsh. Search continues for missing hunter. Woman vanishes after night near marsh. The dates ran in a rough pattern. 1971, 74, 78, 82. The gaps were not exact, but they were close. 3 or 4 years apart, over and over. I scanned downward, tracking the years. There were a few mentions of drownings in other places, a car wreck on the highway, a house fire. Jim had circled the words about the marsh in red ink. "That is only the ones they admit to," he said. "The drunk who wandered in and never walked out, the kid who liked to sneak out at night, the woman whose husband swore she left town. If the last place they were seen was within spitting distance of Hollow Marsh, I count it." I swallowed. "So what is the pattern then?" Jim stepped up beside me and pointed a nicotine-stained finger at the rows of dates. "Count the years between them," he said. "Roughly 3, sometimes 2, sometimes 4, but the count is steady. The marsh takes someone on a schedule. When it does, the town gets a quiet stretch. No accidents, no drownings, no odd vanishings. Then the count creeps up again." "You think this is deliberate?" I asked. "I do not think," Jim replied. "I know. The older folks had a name for the thing in the swamp. They called it the warden, something that keeps tally in that water." I let out an unsteady laugh. "So this is what? A town monster story to keep kids out of the mud?" "If it was just that," he said, "you would not see this." He tapped a clipping near the bottom of the board. It was newer, maybe 15 years old. "Third local missing. In a year, all last seen near Hollow Marsh." I read the subheading, then I noticed the date. The same year my father packed us up and moved. "I do not remember this," I said, voice low. "You were a kid," Jim said. "Your father did not want you anywhere near it. He was out there every night with the search parties." "What happened?" I asked. "The marsh fell behind," Jim said simply. 4 years went by with no one taken. People thought it was over. They started walking their dogs down there. Kids went to drink at the overlook. Then that year came, and it took 3 before the frost. "Accidents," I said weakly. Jim shook his head. "All of them were people who should have known better. A man who tried to drain part of it for a building project. A kid who boasted about swimming across it. A woman who used to dump trash in the reeds at night. The warden does not just keep count, it also punishes." I turned away from the board. My head felt stuffed. "This is insane," I said. "You cannot blame a swamp for every bad thing that happens near town." "You can believe whatever you want," Jim replied. "I am telling you the rule. The warden does not fall far behind. If it goes too long without a proper offering, that thing in the water comes looking." I did not sleep much that night. The house my father left me creaked in the wind. Every sound was like a footstep outside the door or a slap of something against the windows. I knew it was my own mind, stirred up by stories and clippings, but logic grows stale in the dark. I got out of bed around midnight and walked to the kitchen for water. As I stood in the narrow hallway, I heard it. A faint sound, far off but clear in the stillness. Slosh, slosh, slosh. As if someone were walking while completely soaked, heavy boots full of water, every step leaving a puddle. I froze. The sound drifted, not quite outside the house, not quite inside. It seemed to move along the street, past the front of the house, then fade toward town. "You are imagining it," I told myself. In the morning, when I stepped onto the porch, there were no wet footprints. The dusty road looked the same, but something small had been left on the top step. A clutch of marsh reeds, tied together with a strip of filthy cloth. I stared at it for a long time. By mid-morning, the whole town knew. "Jim says it is a sign," the cashier told me at the grocery store. "Means the count is coming due." At the post office, an old woman shook her head. "Should have seen this coming. No one has gone missing in years." At the diner, the waitress poured my coffee and whispered, "If you hear knocking after midnight, do not answer the door." "I thought this was about the marsh," I said. She shivered. "You think that thing cares where you are standing when it takes you?" That afternoon I drove back out to Hollow Marsh because I had no better ideas, and because fear does not always tell you to stay away. Sometimes it drags you closer. The overlook was empty. The air above the water shimmered with heat, but the marsh itself looked cold. Flies buzzed in slow circles. The dark patch near the center had grown, or I had convinced myself it had. I leaned on the rail and tried to breathe. "All right," I said under my breath. "If you are real, show me something." Nothing happened, of course. Then I had the thought that ruined everything. What if you could cheat it? If the warden needed a body to keep its count straight, maybe it did not care where that body came from. If something already dead ended up in that water, would it be enough to satisfy whatever rule the marsh obeyed? On the ride back into town, I passed the small veterinary clinic on the edge of the highway. Out back there was a bright blue dumpster. The idea finished forming. "This is not your problem," I told myself. "You could move." But the truth sat heavy in my chest. I did not have the money to move. I did not have a job waiting anywhere. The house was paid off. The only asset I had was planted at the edge of this town, and this town was planted at the edge of that marsh. If the warden was real, I was stuck with it. For the rest of the day, I tried not to think about the dumpster behind the clinic. By nightfall, I had lost that fight. Clouds swallowed the moon. The road to Hollow Marsh was a strip of darker gray between the trees. I drove with my lights off for the last quarter mile, wincing at every crackle of gravel under the tires. The bundle on the passenger seat smelled like freezer burn and something metallic. The clinic dumpster had not been locked. The thick black bags had been heavier than I expected. I told myself they were only animal remains, things already gone, things no one wanted. I parked behind a screen of scrub trees, far from the small gravel lot near the overlook path. No one drove out here after dark if they could help it. My heart still hammered like I was about to rob a bank. I hauled the bag out of the car, staggered under the weight, and half dragged it down the path. Every twig that snapped seemed to reverberate through the area. Frogs stopped croaking as I passed, as if the whole marsh were holding its breath. At the edge of the walkway, I stopped. The marsh stretched out in front of me, a black sheet broken by darker shapes. The smell was stronger at night, sour and heavy. "This is stupid," I whispered. I wrestled the bag over the rail, tore it open with a box cutter, and spilled its contents into the water. "There," I said through my teeth. "That should count for something." The marsh swallowed it without comment. For a long moment I stood there, waiting for some sign. Lightning, a roar, a voice from the reeds, anything. Nothing came. Then, From directly below the overlook, I heard a sound. Not a splash, not a frog. A slow, thick gurgle, like someone trying to breathe through a throat full of mud. Something pale moved just under the surface, brushing against the submerged posts of the walkway. Skin, I thought wildly. That is skin. I stumbled back, almost fell, then turned and ran up the path, branches slapping my arms. I could hear the sound behind me, following the posts, scraping along the wood. At the car, I fumbled the keys and dropped them, cursed, picked them up with shaking hands, and finally got the engine started. Gravel spat from under the tires as I tore away from the marsh, and did not slow down until the first streetlights of town appeared ahead. By the time I collapsed into bed, dawn was bleeding into the sky. When I woke, it was to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. I answered without checking the display. "Evan," Jim said on the other end. His voice sounded wrong, strained and brittle. "Turn on your television." "It doesn't work," I said. "Then go stand outside," he replied. "You will hear enough." He hung up. My mouth was dry. I rolled out of bed, pulled on yesterday's jeans, and walked to the front door. When I opened it, the first thing I heard was the wail of a siren. It came from somewhere near the highway, long and rising, then cut off, then started again. Other sounds carried with it, shouting, a woman crying, the chop of a helicopter far off. I stepped off the porch. Neighbors were gathered in the road, some in bathrobes, some in work clothes, all looking in the same direction. Toward the edge of town, toward the tree line that hid the marsh. "Car went in," someone said. "Up by the clinic." "Took the ditch too fast," another voice added. "Hit the embankment and went straight into the drainage pond." My heart seemed to drop straight through my ribs. Drainage pond. Clinic. "Did they get them out?" I asked. A man I recognized from the diner shook his head. Driver was pinned. Water filled the cab before anybody could reach him. "Who was it?" I whispered. He hesitated. "Dr. Reeves. The vet. The man whose name was painted on the side of the clinic in tidy letters. The man whose practice I had raided for the pieces I had dumped into the marsh. He had been working late, I thought. Maybe locking up. Maybe taking the curve faster than usual because he wanted to get home. Maybe his tires slipped on something. Or maybe the thing that keeps count had decided that if I wanted to involve his clinic in the ledger, it would balance it in its own way. My stomach twisted. I felt something watching us, not from the crowd, not from the road, but from farther off. The tree line swayed, leaves trembling. The air smelled faintly of stagnant water. "The marsh does not fall behind." The words rang in my head, in Jim's voice. I turned and got into my car. I found Jim at the overlook. He stood at the rail, staring at the dark patch in the center of the marsh. The sky above was cloudy and low, crushing the light out of everything. "You did something stupid," he said without looking at me. I opened my mouth to deny it, then closed it again. There did not seem to be much point. "I thought it would work," I said. My voice sounded small in the open air. "If it just needed bodies, then maybe there was a way to feed it without anyone else getting hurt." Jim laughed once. It was an ugly sound. "You tried to bargain with something that does not know what a bargain is," he said. "That thing in there only understands two numbers, ahead and behind." "He was already dead," I said. It was a useless argument, and I knew it. "They were already dead in that bag." "The warden does not care," Jim replied. "You pointed at that clinic and told the marsh that is where you wanted the count to come from. It took you at your word." He finally turned to face me. His eyes were bloodshot. "Do you understand now?" he asked. "There is no cheating. There is no offering some poor animal and calling it even. There is only the count. If you try to dodge it, bend it, move it over an inch, it snaps back and takes more." My throat was tight. "So what happens now?" "The same thing that always happens," Jim said. "People mourn. They put flowers by the ditch. They say it was bad luck, a slick patch, a moment of distraction. They forget the reeds that will start growing thicker there next year. And the warden? I forced myself to ask. His gaze shifted past me, out over the water. For a while it is ahead, he said. When the frost comes, it will be even. Then the years start again. I stared at the black patch. It seemed larger now. I could see something moving under the surface, just at the edge of my vision. Not a fish, not a log. Something bigger. Something that brushed the reeds aside as it passed. The wind shifted, carrying the smell around us. In it, under the rot and mud, I thought I could smell something else. Antiseptic. Rubber gloves. The faint memory of a clinic hallway. I did not mean for that to happen, I said. He sighed. Intention does not count for much with things like this. For a long time, we stood there without speaking. Finally, Jim said, "You have a choice to make, Evan. Same one your father faced." "Leave?" I asked. He nodded. "Some folks stay. They make peace with it. They pretend it is all coincidence. They live with the knowledge that every few years the water will take someone, and they just hope it is not them or theirs. Others decide they do not want that thing in their rear-view mirror every day." "And my father?" I asked. "He stayed as long as he thought he was helping," Jim replied. "After that year with the three of them, he knew he could not do anything, so he packed you up and left. Tried to keep the story from following you." I thought of the house, the unpaid bills, the empty job listings in town. I thought of the clinic, the twisted wreck of the car in the ditch, the reeds that would grow around that spot. "I have nowhere else to go," I said. "That is the lie this place loves the most," Jim said softly. We both watched as a slow ripple spread outward from the center of the marsh. It rolled under the mat of reeds and lapped against the posts of the overlook. For a moment, as the water rose against the wood, I saw something pressed to the surface. A face. Bloated, pale, eyes open and staring, mouth full of black water. It might have been my imagination, stitched together from fear and guilt. Then it sank, leaving only the usual dark. "You see it now," Jim whispered. "Yeah," I said. At home, I walked through the rooms without really seeing them. The old photos, the sagging couch, the boxes I had not unpacked. My father had tried to cut me free of this place. I had moved right back into its shadow. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face. When I looked up, the mirror showed my reflection, pale and tired. For a second, as the water dripped from my chin, I thought I saw something standing behind me in the doorway. Tall, thin, shape made of dripping reeds and black, rippling skin, as if someone had stuffed a body with murky water and let it walk around without bones. Its face wasn't quite a face, features suggested by light and shadow. Where eyes should have been, dark sockets stared back at me. I blinked. The doorway was empty. My heart slammed against my ribs hard enough to hurt. It was not in the house, I told myself. It was in my head. In the marsh. In any place I could not see the bottom. I sat down on the edge of the tub and buried my face in my hands. After a while, I stood, walked to the bedroom, and dragged my suitcase from under the bed. I did not have a plan. I did not have a job waiting anywhere else. I had half a tank of gas and a mind full of fear. But I knew one thing. Staying felt less like survival and more like standing at the lip of a dark hole, waiting for my turn. As I carried the suitcase through the front room, I paused at the window. From there I could see, far off beyond the stand of trees, a faint shimmer where the marsh lay. For a moment, I thought I saw something tall standing in the water, right at the edge of the dark patch, watching the town, waiting. The distance made it impossible to be sure. It might have been a dead tree, a trick of light, or it might have been the warden, counting. I set my jaw, turned away, and walked out the door, got in my car, and drove. I did not look in the rearview mirror until I was miles away, but I knew the marsh was back there, patient, watching. It would not miss me. It would not chase me. It did not need to. Somewhere, sooner or later, in that slow black water. Someone else would step too close to the edge. Someone would slip. Someone would think they were safe, because no one ever warned them. No one ever told them about the creature that keeps score in the dark water. The warden would keep its count. The warden of Hollow Marsh. Thanks for staying until the end. If you enjoyed our content, please like and subscribe. It's very helpful to a small channel. Chapter 1. Into the Deep. I'd been hunting with Dave Madsen for years, but even he hesitated before stepping into Blackwell Swamp. The map still showed it, a knot of green on the edge of Chippewa flowage. But no one went there. Not since the old stories started circulating again. The glimpses of lights in the bogs, missing hikers, the one guy who came out mumbling about the deer with the wrong face. Most folks chalked it up to beer and backwoods gossip. But Dave liked quiet, and Blackwell promised nothing if not that. Still think this is a good idea? I asked, slapping a mosquito off my neck. We stood at the edge of the overgrown game trail that was barely visible beneath decades of moss and rotting leaves. Place hasn't been hunted in 50 years, Dave said, oiling his bolt-action Remington. That means the bucks are big, slow, and dumb. I snorted. Kinda sounds like us, but seriously, this place is going to be quite a hike to get to. Dave gave me a look. You want a trophy or not? I hesitated, then shouldered my pack. Okay, we better get going then. We hiked for 2 hours into the green gloom. The deeper we went, the more the air thickened. Not just humid, but heavy, like it clung to your skin. Cedar trees loomed like ageless sentinels, their roots bowing out of the black water in twisted arthritic shapes. Thorny vines dangled like nooses from the canopy, and dragonflies skimmed the surface of standing pools that stank of sulfurous mud and algae. Birdsong stopped around noon. We didn't notice it at first, but once we did, the silence became oppressive. The only sound was the squelch of boots in the mud, and the occasional croak of a bullfrog that sounded deeper than it should have. Hollow, almost. Mocking. You ever hear that story? I asked as we finished setting up Dave's tree stand, an old but solid aluminum platform hoisted 10 feet up the trunk of a dying oak. What story? Dave replied, adjusting the scope on his rifle. The one about the boy that disappeared here in '77. People said he wandered off from a scout camp downriver. His dad found his shirt tangled in a tree, 10 feet off the ground. No body, no prints. Dave didn't respond. He just squinted into the woods. I sighed. Dave, can't even pretend to be creeped out? You want to tell ghost stories, do it by the fire tonight. Chapter 2, The Watcher. The first deer showed up at dusk. It was a doe. Lanky, awkward, twitchy. Not worth shooting. But Dave watched it through the scope, noting the way it moved. It's off, he muttered into the radio clipped to his vest. Come again? I asked from 50 yards west. Something's wrong with it. Like it's limping, but not from an injury. He watched the doe lift its head suddenly and stare at him. Not in his direction. At him. Eyes locked. That's when he noticed. Its pupils were too big. Almost human. The doe bolted without a sound. That night, we camped in a dry patch of land hemmed in by twisted oak roots and cottonwood. The fire crackled low, but neither of us found comfort in its warmth. You didn't shoot, I said, sipping from a metal flask. I didn't like the way it looked, Dave replied. It was twitchy. I chuckled nervously. You going soft on me? Dave didn't smile. What if it was sick? You mean with one of those wasting diseases? He paused, then shook his head. I don't know. We fell asleep to the sound of the swamp. Croaks, splashes, and something else. Something walking. Chapter 3, The Not Deer. The second day, the silence was worse. The air had a weight to it, thick as wool and hard to breathe. Flies swarmed like they were drunk, buzzing too slow, as if time lagged out here. Dave took his post in the stand again while I covered the low ground. It came just before sunset. From the tree stand, Dave spotted movement. Something big. Brown fur. Antlers. Massive, jagged, too wide for any native deer. At first he felt the thrill of the hunt rise in him, but then the creature stepped into the clearing. and Dave felt something in his gut twist, like his organs were trying to crawl away from the thing below. It had the shape of a deer, but that's where it ended. Its head was flat and wide, with two forward-facing eyes like a wolf's. Its antlers weren't just antlers. They twitched, like the limbs of a dying spider. Its legs bent the wrong way, and its hooves weren't cloven right. They seemed soft and almost mushy. And from its mouth, "Jesus," Dave whispered, lowering his scope. It had fangs, and worse yet, while he was observing all the differences between this thing and a real deer, he hadn't noticed that the creature had stopped and was staring directly at him. And then it stomped, thunderously, loud enough that we both jerked out of fear. A low, grinding sound echoed up through the trees. Not quite a growl, a grating noise, like rusted machinery turning after decades of no use. "Tom," Dave whispered into the radio. "Tom, do you see this thing?" I responded with a very dry mouth, "Yeah." The not deer moved. Not like a deer, but almost like a cat would move, slow and deliberate. It was moving toward the base of the tree stand. Dave tried to aim his rifle, but as the hideous creature moved from tree to the base of his tree, he didn't have a shot. Compounding his problems was the trembling in his hands, making it almost impossible to steady the shot. Then it started climbing. Its arms, yes, its front legs were functioning like arms now, gripped the ladder with what were either knees, elbows, or ankles. There were too many bends in its limbs to know. The lower hooves seemed to have no problems finding purchase on top of the rungs of the ladder, as if it had done this many times before. Suddenly, I realized that unless I did something, this thing was going to get Dave. I shook my head to clear my mind and realized what I had to do. With my scope, it was actually an easy shot, so I aimed, and when it was all target in my scope, I pulled the trigger. The shot hit its shoulder with a sickening wet thwack, but the creature didn't even flinch. It kept climbing, hissing now, its head only a few rungs from the top of the ladder. So I took another shot. There was another loud thwack. The creature reeled with the impact. This time the creature howled, a high, keening wail like a child screaming after being stung by a bee. Flecks of mucus and fog blew out with the scream, but it was determined, and it stayed on the ladder, still staring up at Dave, its antlers now well over the level of the platform. Many people don't know this, but a .30-06 round will go through the engine block of a car. Watching this literal monster absorb 2 of these powerful rounds was horrifying to us, but the third round could not be denied. I hit it again, and what I heard was the boom of the shot, the thwack of the hit, and the hollow whump of the thing's body hitting the earth about 8 feet below. I expected to see a body, but my unbelieving eyes saw the thing spasming for about 10 seconds, limbs bending in impossible angles, reminding me of a dying cockroach, before it picked itself up and limped into the underbrush, leaving a trail deeper into the swamp. Chapter 4, Getting Out. We didn't speak much as we packed. Every twig snap made us flinch. The swamp was alive now, but not in the way we understood. It wasn't the animals. It was the thing. Or things. Because I swore I saw something else move out there. Something just like it. Maybe smaller. Maybe. Waiting. We left before dawn. No trophy. No photos. Just silence, and the memory of those eyes. Too human to belong in a deer's face. As we reached the tree line, I spoke for the first time in an hour. "You think it followed us?" Dave didn't answer, but he turned around and stared into the trees. There, between the trunks, something watched. It stomped. Epilogue, 3 weeks later. Dave never went back into the woods. He sold his gear. He moved to another town. Started drinking again. I tried to pretend it hadn't happened. But one night, on my back porch, my dog started barking. Something stood at the edge of the woods. Antlers too wide. Eyes too close together. And it stomped. Once. I called Dave the next morning. No answer. The sheriff found Dave's front door open. No sign of struggle except for the front door hanging almost off its hinges. No sign of Dave. Just tracks. Big ones. Somewhere in the heart of Blackwell Swamp, something waits. It wears the skin of a deer. It watches. It sniffs the air. And it learns. And now, it holds a grudge.
Discovery. The day we found it, my best friend and I were riding our four-wheelers in the forest backcountry of the Northland, looking for an old log cabin. The wind had that dry taste that meant fall was on the way. Dana rode ahead like she always does, chin lifted, visor up, reading the woods like a book she had already underlined. I kept my machine purring, letting the sand road unspool in pale ribbons while the pine trees made the wind sound colder. She had said it earlier. Look for anything that might be a road older than this one, and I kept scanning for ruts that might be barely visible. It did not look promising, not as easy as the map suggested. Then Dana's hand shot up, and she pointed into the trees and yelled, "What's that?" Through the timber, a circle of water lay in a bald ring of dirt, 20 yards across, as if someone had set a black coin into the land and polished the edges. No scrub, no weeds, not even a stubborn tuft of grass. The forest itself stopped at a respectful distance, like it had been warned off. We killed the engines. The silence was its own sound after the noise of the road. The pool looked like liquid obsidian, but it did not reflect the sky or the trees. That's weird, I thought to myself. Seriously, what is this thing? I said out loud. I don't know. Why don't you jump in and see? Dana said in her most serious voice as she pretended to push me in. We both laughed, but the laugh dissipated into the empty space of the black pool a little too quickly. Do you think there are any fish in there? I asked, because finding a hidden fishing hole is a dream of mine. I don't think there are even any bugs in there, Dana guessed. I thought I saw a swirl of water in there, I said, already looking for a rock to throw. The rock I chose to throw was gray and heavy for its size. I tossed it and the sound it made was a hollow kerthunk. Ripples went out, but they moved like the water was thick, like jello. Then the circle was calm again, like it had been for uncountable thousands of years. Who knows what's brewing in there? But what I do know is we've been looking for a place to hold our next party, and there is nobody around for miles, Dana said with a note of excitement. Music on dead water. We brought friends. We brought coolers, mason jar lights, songs that our school disapproved of. Trucks lined these in track, four-wheelers nosed in like animals at a creek. Dana wired the jars between the trees, and the warm bulbs gave the place a glow that felt kind until you noticed what they were shining on. The noise got distorted beyond the clearing. It did not seem to travel far out into the woods. It came back like it had changed its mind, like an echo. The air near the water felt dense enough to slice with a knife. We told stories. We clinked cans and danced. The horror of the situation first became evident when two of the pickup trucks were still parked at the site the next day. Two of the partygoers were missing. In fact, it was the two guys who were last seen taking down the lights. Their bodies were found after a community-wide search when the black pool was dragged with dark triple hooks that the rescuers didn't want to touch with ungloved hands. And there was no logical explanation. That night, I texted Dana because some words needed to come out of my head. Me. I know I saw a swirl in the water when we found that place. Dana. You couldn't have. Nothing can be living in that water. Me. It was like the swirl from a big lake trout's tail. Dana. If anything was in there, they would have found it when they were looking for the bodies. I set the phone on the counter and stared at the glassy black of the switched-off microwave, and for a breath or two, it looked like the pool, which was the cause of all the misery. Detectives Bain. We met Detective Pierre at the station, and he had more questions, some of which could only be answered at the scene of the crime. When we met at the sand road, the shadows were already doing their slow work. He had a face that said he had seen a lot, but was impressed by little. Detective Pierre asked about every detail we could remember. After hearing everything, he put his hand into his hair, absently-mindedly scratching the back of his head, and did a 360-degree turn, trying to make sense of everything he'd heard. But time seemed to stop as he faced the pool. His hand dropped, and he stared intently into the water. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He took one stiff step toward the water, and then another. "What are you doing?" Dana nervously asked. Detective Pierre made a terrified grunt as a response, and then continued to walk slowly into the pool, eyes wide, hands to his side. I rushed over to grab him, but Dana screamed, "Don't go in the water!" When Detective Pierre was chest deep, there was a swirl of water from the middle of the pool, and then something crashed into him from below, and he was gone. Little waves washed up on the mucky shore, and then they too stopped, and all was quiet. But this was a quiet that was not the old quiet. It was a new one, a quiet sitting on top of the dread that the sound of splashing would once again come from the pool. At the station, they gave us coffee that had been in the pot too long. We recounted the same facts enough times that it started to sound like a story. A woman at the front desk watched us with interest, but her look was lost in the buzz of activity and hours-long interviews. I soon found out that Dolores was her name. She contacted me the next day, asking if we could meet off the record. The plan was to meet at the bar with the blinking Schlitz sign off of Highway 2. Dana and I were already enjoying burgers when Dolores arrived. With no small talk, she jumped right in. "I saw the report, but can you tell me in your own words what happened to Detective Pierre?" Hesitatingly, because it was probably the 15th time we had recounted the details, we agreed. After hearing the story, Dolores looked shaken. "There is a legend about tortured spirits that live in black waters. But I will have to talk to a friend. Can we speak again tomorrow?" "Of course," Dana and I said together. Lines on the ground. We met Dolores' friend the next night. Richard was an Ojibwe elder. He said little. He led more with silence than with words. He said he'd have to see the black pool to see what he could do. He wanted to see it that night. Dana and I arrived at around 8 o'clock that night. Dolores and Richard soon after. The night air was pleasant, everywhere but by the pool, where it was thicker. Richard drew some lines on the ground with colored clay, sat down and began to quietly drum and chant, like it was only intended for him to hear. Dolores pulled us almost to the edge of the clearing and told us to sit down and to be quiet and still. After only about 15 minutes, fog began to form above the pool. 15 minutes later, the surface began to be troubled by something underneath. A short time later, we all heard a loud splash. Richard didn't even pause, but the three of us saw a shape appear out of the fog, dragging itself out of the pool. It had the form of a human, but was covered in sludge from the bottom of the pool. There were rotten sticks tied to its back, and it had very long, knotted black hair. Its eyes glowed red, and a gurgling sound came from the hole that was the remains of its mouth. Its hands had long fingers with even longer black nails, and a sit clawed its way out of the pool. An overwhelming stench of fetid swamp filled the air. Most of its body seemed to be only skin on bones, but its stomach was protruding like a snake right after a huge meal. Richard barely seemed to notice, and kept chanting and drumming as the thing crawled toward him. But when it hit one of the colored clay lines barely 2 feet from him, it was like it hit an invisible brick wall. It recoiled and shrieked, then tried to advance again, only to be painfully driven back by the invisible force. Richard made a satisfied sound in his throat and took the bag from his neck and threw it on the horrible figure. The figure immediately began to writhe and make a sound that produced a feeling of nausea in Dana and me. After a minute of the hideous scene, Richard pulled out a carved stick that had a round stone ball attached to the end, and with surprising power and quickness, stuck the evil creature on the head. There was a loud crack, and the terrible creature went limp. "She suffered long enough anyhow," Richard said with no hint of the awfulness that had just transpired in his voice. As we wondered what that meant, the moon came out and shed its light on a pool that was now clear. Clear. A normal pond with a pale bottom and gray rocks. I felt something loosen in the middle of me. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We go," Richard said. "We move on." We walked out. 10 steps into the trees, the night felt light again, simple, almost friendly. I leaned over a ditch and vomited until my stomach was weak. At home, I brushed until my gums bled. The story under the story. We met Richard at the diner. He told us the old legend the way a man tells you a board is rotten, not to scare you, just so you will not step through. A very long time ago, a small tribe lived in the old-growth forests south of Lake Superior. He told us about the beautiful splashing otter, daughter of a war chief. She broke a hallowed law that could not be ignored. The punishment was older than legend itself. They took her to a spring, tied her to a large wicker cedar frame, and cursed her until the power of the curse killed everything alive in the area, including the pool. Then they tipped her in. Blackness came out of her mouth as she screamed under the water which filled the pool. The water boiled. The screams were loud enough that they were heard in the village and started causing people to go crazy. So black was the curse. Within a few days, the village was abandoned. The people left everything to get away, including their crops and food storage. Within a few years, the rest of the people were gone. The forest is a beautiful place, and you may find tranquil and breathtaking streams and ponds. But don't forget, some places have seen uncounted centuries of people and madness. If you come across a black pool in the Northland, there may be a natural explanation, or maybe it could be the result of a 500-year-old curse. The world does not always work by your rules. It has its own set which are millennia older. Leave the black pools alone. If you enjoyed this telling, please subscribe and like.